Hello, my friends. It is certainly a bittersweet day today. It's 9/11, and it's also the 21st anniversary of my mother's death. She died at home, not in the Twin Towers, but yeah, in 2003. So that's always, as I say, a bittersweet occasion for me because of both of those things. And it's also a little bittersweet on a very different area with respect to our friend. I was already unhappy enough. Well, unhappy is not the right word, but feeling nostalgic when he went from being a quite immature 14-year-old to having his first public role and starting to grow up. And now we have skipped forward almost a year to just after his 16th birthday. And anyone who has had teenagers or been around teenagers know that there comes this point at whatever age, and yeah, the jump to 16 would be, I think, a fairly normal age when you're really dealing with a young adult. He or she may still be immature in a long ways, but there's in a lot of ways, but there's still a qualitative difference. And that certainly is the case here with Dmitri from this very first 1907 diary entry, September 1907 diary entry. It was crystal clear to me that, yeah, this is a different fellow. It's the same one, but different. And so, see what you think about that. I'm not getting very many comments, and they're always welcome. So if you would like to weigh in on that, then please do feel free. But yeah, I've got to stop calling him a child. He and his sister no longer call them children. So Maria is 17 now. Dmitri is 16. And he is writing from Crimea, or the Crimea. I kind of like the Crimea. I don't know why they ever changed it. In Russian, the word is Krim, and there's no question of there being any article because there are no articles in Russian. So I guess that's why somebody decided it should be called Crimea instead of the Crimea. But anyway, I'm babbling a little bit here. So, I didn't realize this actually. That's odd that I didn't notice. It is actually the date of Dmitri's diary entry is also 11th of September. So it was 9/11 there in the Crimea when he was writing, although here it is a Wednesday and there it was a Tuesday. All right, so interesting. Let's dive in. We have quite an interesting first remark here. My God, I had no idea that I would end up writing in Crimea, or indeed what uniform I would be wearing. The uniform of the Horse Guards. Yes, curious though it sounds, we're in the Crimea. After rereading my filthy defilements, I've arrived at the deeply held conclusion that it's a good thing to write after all. There's no point dwelling on the last few days here in the Crimea, but I'll say a few words about the general situation. We arrived here with Tyotia, who, thank God, quickly left. Every day we took excursions on horseback, on pacers, and we were all happy with each other. That peace lasted until the ill-fated day when Aunt Minnie arrived here. Yes, strange as it seems, that's what happened. Misunderstandings immediately began between her and GM and EO, and GM lost his good mood, although now he's gotten it back. Of course, that bad mood resonated with me as well. I somehow felt uneasy in Aunt Minnie's presence, or when Aunt Minnie was meeting with GM. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That is actually the first two paragraphs of the diary entry of the 11th. So tomorrow it will be the 12th, but we'll still have Dmitri on the 11th. And it's such a long diary entry. He never wrote diary entries like that when he was 14 or 15. So he's moving closer to what he'll be doing when he's an adult in his diaries entries. So what to say about the things he's telling us? Well, clearly it was a surprise to him that they ended up being in the Crimea. It was the custom of the imperial family of Nicholas II and Alexandra to go to the Crimea. The court, of course, followed them to the Crimea. They went every year around this time. I think after the military maneuvers in Krasnaya Selo, which I believe were around mid-August, then they would migrate to the Crimea and spend September there, I believe. I'm not an expert on Nicholas and Alexandra, but anyway, I can look into that. So Dmitri wasn't expecting to be part of that. So we will find out in later in this same diary entry that up until now he's been in Moscow. So he and Maria are sort of living at the whim of Aunt Ella. Where she goes, they go. And where she stays, they stay. So it was a surprise to both of them. And one of the big things that's happened in that period of time is that Maria has gotten engaged. So Dmitri will be talking about that as well. So she's 17 and she will be getting married in 1908, and she's preparing for that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Now Dmitri himself is reaching a big milestone here. He has not been wearing uniforms except for on special occasions. Not wearing a uniform at home and not wearing a uniform when he goes out, unless it's a special occasion, a regimental dinner or something like that. But now Nicholas has given him permission to wear the Horse Guards uniform. He was not anticipating that. I'm a little surprised that he wasn't, because after all, having turned 16, it certainly wouldn't be appropriate for him to be wearing sailor suits. And it was the custom in the imperial family for young men to wear uniforms, and not just in the imperial family. His various peers, other boys of 16 who were in school, in military school, at gymnasium, at university, in one of the cadet corps, any of the corps de page, any of those would have been wearing uniforms every time they went out. And so maybe what he was surprised about was not that Uncle Nicholas would let him switch to a uniform, but that it would be the uniform of the Horse Guards. But that also is not surprising, because that was the regiment that he was already enrolled in and had been since the time he was a baby, I think. And that was the regiment that the plan was for him to do his actual service in. Okay, so he reiterates his surprise again. Curious though it sounds, we're in the Crimea. Now there's this interesting statement about rereading my filthy defilements. And that, I think, is probably a mixture of sarcasm and a little bit of the maybe a little bit of guilt, because as we've seen in prior diary entries, at this stage in his life, or when he was 14, 15, he really took his religious education seriously. He didn't like to go, to long church service. He didn't want to go and stay at a monastery for a couple of nights. All of those things are perfectly understandable, but he took the spiritual aspect of it seriously. that, you know, if he didn't want to pray, then that was sinful of him. And when he wanted something, when he wanted to perform well, when he was 14 at the big parade, you know, he said he was going to pray really hard. And so, you know, there was that side to him. But there was also the side to him that will come more and more to the fore, that his whole life he would be someone particularly enamored of the female sex. And his whole life, I can't speak for during his marriage, but his whole bachelor life, he would always be pursuing women and being pursued by women, and very much the Don Juan. And there's some indications that that had already started. At least while he was still 16, he would have this big incident with Queen Maria of Romania, whom he claimed to love, where there was some question of who had tried to seduce whom, and it had led to a big scandal. So that was coming up. And so maybe when he writes about the filthy defilements that he'd written in his diary, you know, maybe he'd indulged in some fantasizing or talking about particular girls or women that were around him. Yeah, it's news to me that he was keeping a diary during this period, period of almost a year when he wasn't writing. But it may be that at some point, if there really were filthy defilements in that diary, I'm sure that's an exaggeration, but if there really was something that he was embarrassed about, he might have destroyed them, as he did his 1916 diary. But at any rate, initially, upon rereading those, he arrives at the deeply held conclusion that it's a good thing to write after all. So, yeah, take that as you will. That's language that he uses a lot. I meant to actually write the deeply held conviction. That is an error on my part, because that's language that he uses a lot in his adult diary entries. Deeply held conviction is something that he repeated about various things. Okay, so he's not going to fill us in on exactly what he's been doing since he's arrived in the Crimea. It seems like he hasn't been there very long. He's very pleased that Ella has left. So Tjotja, we arrived here with Tjotja, who, thank God, quickly left. So he's very happy about that. And, you know, it seemed like she had been lightening up a little bit on the strict rules that she'd sent for Dimitri and Maria. But I think, you know, yeah, she was probably still a strict person, and she kept them close to her. And so I think, yeah, it was probably a relief for our 16-year-old friend. And so it looked like everything was going well. You know, they'd been there a few days. They were going out riding on horseback every day. I had to look up what kind of horses these were. I thought maybe it was a variety, but it's a certain kind of pace. So the English translation, I guess, is pacers. It's trained. It's a horse that's trained to move in a certain way that I guess is very beautiful. But so anyway, they were going out on these horses every day, and he says, you know, we were all happy with each other. So everyone, I guess, would include Maria and GM and the whole little party. Ella has already left. And it seems like, reading ahead a little bit, it seems to me that they were not living with Nicholas and Alexandra, that Tjotja had installed them in one of the villas, and he will be talking a little bit about the Yusupov's villa. And in 1908, when we start not with diary entries but with letters, you'll see that he'll return to the Crimea in 1908 with Ella, not with Nicholas and Alexandra, and that at least on that occasion they were living at the villa or one of the buildings on the estate of the Yusupovs. But for now, I'm not sure where he's living. It just seems like he wasn't living with Nicholas and Alexandra. So everybody was happy, everything was going well, and then Aunt Minnie arrives, and there's immediate tension, there's immediate conflict between her and Laming. So here, I've showed this before, but I'll hold up my picture. That's George Mihailovich, and here he is in this picture with his wife, Aunt Minnie, and she was Dimitri's real biological aunt. Unlike Ella or Aunt Alex, she was his mother's sister. And I think she was his mother's only sister. So as far as I know, they were close. And so it's quite understandable that Minnie feels like she should be the one, if I'm correct in surmising this, who is having more say in the life of her niece and nephew than Laming is. And specifically, probably more in Dimitri's life, because things had pretty much already been arranged for Maria, but here is Dimitri in the Crimea with Laming as his sort of teacher and role model, and maybe there was a little bit of a power struggle between Georgy Mikhailovich and Aunt Minnie over what Dimitri was learning and doing and how he should prepare for his future. But at any rate, Laming had been in a good mood, everybody had been happy, and then Aunt Minnie arrived, and immediately there were these misunderstandings, as Dimitri put it. So, yeah, he's not blaming either one of them, and not telling us who's at fault, not making a judgment about that. He's just sort of saying, well, yeah, when she came, things took a turn for the worse because of this tension between the two of them, and in fact it very much affected him. So he uses these initials. So misunderstandings immediately began between her and GM and EO. Well, who was EO? That, unfortunately, these little things drive me crazy. Unfortunately, I have no idea who EO was. I'm trying to think if there are even that many Russian masculine names that start with an E. There's Yevgeny. There's a few sort of lesser known ones. On the female side, there's Elizaveta. Yeah, I don't know who this person was. Yekaterina. Yeah, so anyway, GM got grumpy, and he was in a bad mood, and it seemed to me from past diary entries that he was a little bit on the moody side. And so Dimitri, who's torn between these two people, I presume, also fell into a bad mood. And it's interesting how he links his mood to GM's. That bad mood resonated with me as well. He says, well, yeah, if this is your immediate father figure and he's in a bad mood and everything's turned gloomy, then that is going to resonate with you, even if you don't have a particularly close relationship with that person. But it may be that at this point they were happy, they had a good relationship, and when that was disrupted, they were both in a bad mood. So, and Dimitri talks about how uneasy, how nervous he feels now when he's in Aunt Minnie's presence, and how nervous he feels when he knows that GM is meeting with Aunt Minnie. And that's another reason why I think this really isn't about Maria. It's about Dimitri. And apparently Minnie had some concerns, some general concerns, or maybe even some specific concerns that she felt the need to work out with GM, and so it's not surprising that Dimitri felt nervous when he knew that they were meeting with each other, and he was also probably nervous, about what mood GM was going to be in when he returned. And I think, He still doesn't have much agency himself over anything, where he's going to go, what uniform he's going to wear. Yeah, so undoubtedly he felt ill at ease. And in the past, he seemed to have been fine with Aunt Minnie. He talked about how he thought that she liked Maria better than him, but that so this is going all the way back, of course, to when he was 14. And they went and visited George and Minnie in St. Petersburg. And he talked about how nice she was to him, that he'd always thought that she liked Maria better than him, but how nice she was being to him. And I'm sure she did actually feel quite attached to them, and I'm not sure why George and Minnie weren't given custody, since they were really the closest. Well, I shouldn't say the closest, because Sergei and Paul were brothers, Dmitri's father and the uncle who took custody. But I think, I think Sergei was pretty determined to be the guardian of the children, having no children of his own. And George Mikhailovich, Grand Duke George and Grand Duchess Minnie did have children, or planned to have children. Anyway, I am indulging myself in a lot of speculation here, but I will tell you that things get very interesting, not just in future diary entries, but in this diary entry, and we are going to be following Dmitri through the whole of September, so don't worry about any other big leaps forward in time. And yeah, I'll see you next time.